They called it the Pines House, not because of the trees that surrounded it, most of those were dead, but because of the silence that grew inside it, thick like sap. Generations passed through that house, and not one of them ever left whole. People in town never asked questions. They knew better. They called it bad luck or bad blood, depending on who you asked. But the truth was buried in a family Bible that hadn't been opened since 1917, and a birth certificate tucked inside it that changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. What if I told you there was once a woman who raised her sister's son as her own and married him before he was even old enough to vote? What if I told you no one in their family ever thought it was strange, because it had already happened once before, and once before that? In some corners of forgotten America, the blood runs in circles, and by the time anyone notices, it's already too late. This is the story of the Kinter family, of a woman named Ruth, her sister Abigail, and a boy named Elijah, who carried a family name, but no true father. A story not found in textbooks. A story townspeople still pretend never happened. A story you were never supposed to hear. The Kinter family settled in eastern Kentucky in the late 1800s, where the roads curved like secrets and the hollers swallowed sound. They were mountain people, clannish, hard-worn, private, the kind who didn't take kindly to strangers or questions, and for good reason. The Kinter name had always carried a whisper. People said their blood was old, but what they meant was that it never left the house. It started with Silas Kinter, the great-grandfather. He married his first cousin, who'd also been his nursemaid. Together they had 9 children. Only 5 lived past infancy, and even then, not without scars. One of the girls, Maisie, never spoke a word. Another, Tom, went blind by 15. No one called it inbreeding. They called it God's will, and in those hills, God's will was just another way of saying mind your own business. But it was the next generation that twisted the blood into knots. Silas's son, Vernon, married a woman named Lydia who'd been adopted. The problem was, she hadn't really been. She was Vernon's half-sister, a fact they both knew and both ignored. By the time anyone found out, it didn't matter. Their children were already grown, and by then the family tree had turned into something more like a circle. Ruth and Abigail Kinter were born from that union. Sisters with the same eyes, same voice, same long ash-colored hair. Locals used to joke they were shadows of each other. But Ruth was the elder by 5 years, and that gap gave her power. She was the caretaker. The mother when their real ones stopped getting out of bed. She was also the first to understand what was expected of them, and what it meant to keep a family together, at any cost. When Abigail turned 16, she became pregnant. There was no father listed on the record, no wedding, no name, just a date, and a stillborn silence from the rest of the family. Ruth said she'd raised the wand. The boy they later named Elijah. But behind closed doors, there were no clear lines. No one asked who the father was. No one ever would. Elijah Kinter was born in the summer of 1939, during a storm so violent it uprooted an entire oak tree in the cemetery behind the house. Ruth took it as a sign. Not a bad one, just a reminder that some things die so others can grow. She claimed the boy as her own from the beginning, called herself his mother, fed him from her breast, slept beside him every night, even signed his birth certificate with her name in the mother slot. Abigail was barely mentioned. No one outside the family questioned it. The townsfolk already kept their distance, and those few who did come near, midwives, doctors, churchwomen, never came back a second time. The Kinter home had a smell to it, they said. Not of death or rot, but something older, something close, like earth that's been dug too many times in the same spot. Elijah grew into a quiet, observant child, strange but not unintelligent. He never smiled for photographs. He hated mirrors. He would sit on the front steps for hours, just watching the tree line, like he was waiting for something to come out of it. He didn't speak until age 4. When he finally did, his first word was "Mama." but he said it while pointing at both Ruth and Abigail. The confusion was never cleared up. By age 10, Elijah was taller than most boys in town. His eyes were grey, glassy, distant. His hands were large for his frame, fingers long like he was always halfway to turning into something else. He never attended school. Ruth claimed he was too delicate for public life. In truth, she was teaching him at home, not from books, but from memory, her memory, the family's memory. There's a story that Elijah once asked about his father. Ruth told him, "Your father was chosen, just like you were." He never asked again. Over time, Ruth's relationship with the boy shifted. Not gradually. It happened like a door slamming shut. One night, neighbors heard shouting, a man's voice. When they asked the next day, Ruth said Elijah had become a man that night. She said it with pride, with a strange glint in her eye. He was 13, and she was already planning the wedding. In the spring of 1953, a wedding took place at the Kinter home. No guests, no pastor, no ring. Just Ruth, Elijah, and a small Bible that had belonged to her father. The same Bible with birth certificates folded like secrets between its pages. Ruth wore a faded white dress that once belonged to her mother. Elijah wore his grandfather's suspenders. They took a photo on the porch, standing stiff beside each other like siblings pretending to be strangers. The town didn't speak of it. Some say they didn't know, but that's a lie. Everyone knew something was wrong. They just couldn't figure out what. Elijah was barely 14, but already taller than Ruth. She was nearly 40. They weren't mother and son anymore, not in the way they acted. She called him husband in front of others, and when people asked, she said, "Love ain't always neat, but it runs deep, especially in blood." There was no legal certificate, no official recognition, just a quiet agreement between them, as if they'd signed something older than paper. They shared a bed, ate together in silence, walked the woods at night, whispering about things no one else was meant to understand. Abigail still lived in the house. She never married, never moved. Her hair went white early, and she began to speak in riddles. Locals sometimes saw her sitting by the edge of the creek, talking to herself, whispering the name Elijah like a hymn. Some said she had gone mad from losing her son. Others whispered a darker version, that she hadn't lost him at all, that she was still watching him, waiting. By then, Elijah had stopped speaking to anyone outside the house. He no longer looked people in the eye. His skin was pale but never sunburned. He never left the property. It was as if the blood inside him was tied to the land, and if he ever left it, something would unravel. Years passed. Ruth aged, but only on the outside. Her mind remained sharp, even cruel. She began keeping journals, long, rambling accounts of family history, names scratched out, then rewritten, some repeated, some crossed over. It was in those journals that one line would later appear over and over again, in shaky handwriting, always underlined. Keep the blood clean, keep the blood close. It was the winter of 1958 when Ruth gave birth. She was 44. The doctor didn't come. No one did. According to her journal, she delivered the child alone on the kitchen floor while Abigail stood in the corner, whispering to the walls. The baby was born silent. Ruth said he wasn't crying because he had nothing to fear. He was home already. They named him Isaac. There's no official record of his birth, no hospital documents, no social security number, just a note in Ruth's handwriting, folded and tucked inside the family Bible. Isaac, blood of Ruth, born from the union. He is pure. Pure. It's a word that shows up again and again in the family's documents. Not healthy, not strong, not loved. Pure. As if the boy wasn't a child, but an experiment. A culmination. His features were off from the start. Wide-set eyes, a narrow jaw, toes that curled inwards. The townspeople who saw him said he looked like he had lived before, and not in a good way. They avoided the family entirely after that. Even the postman stopped delivering directly to the door. Inside the house, things grew colder. Ruth had aged rapidly since the birth. Her hands trembled. Her thoughts scattered. She began talking to Isaac like he was something more than a son, something she had summoned. Her journal entries turned frantic. He watches even in sleep. He knows what came before. He must never leave the hill. Elijah, now approaching 20, had changed too. He no longer spoke at all. He would spend hours carving symbols into the wood beams of the attic, circles, crosses, spirals, patterns that no one understood. At night he wandered the fields, whispering to the dark. Some said they saw him digging holes. Others said they saw him eating dirt with his bare hands. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? One neighbor, years later, remembered seeing Ruth standing in the doorway one night holding Isaac in her arms, swaying slowly, singing an old Appalachian lullaby. She wasn't looking at the child. She was looking at the trees, and Isaac was looking at her, not with love, not with fear, but with recognition, as if he already knew what he was. By the time the 1960s arrived, the Kinter home had become more myth than memory, a silhouette on the ridge no one visited, no one acknowledged. The mailbox was rusted shut. The garden had gone wild. Locals swore they heard chanting from the woods at night. Others said they saw 3 figures walking the tree line at dusk, always in a line, always silent. Ruth, Elijah, and little Isaac, the mother, the husband, the son. But inside, the family was unraveling. Ruth's health deteriorated first, not physically. Her body held on longer than anyone expected, but her mind fractured like rotted wood. She began calling Elijah by different names. Sometimes she called him father, sometimes brother, sometimes Silas. She no longer seemed to remember who was who, only that the blood had to stay together. She wrote one final journal entry before she died. It read, "We're all echoes now. I am my mother. Elijah is my son and my father. Isaac is the start and the end. If you split the blood, the house will fall." She died in her sleep in 1966. No death certificate, no funeral, just a note tacked to the door in Elijah's handwriting. "The matriarch has returned to the earth. Do not disturb her." They buried her in the backyard, under the same oak tree that had been struck by lightning the night Elijah was born. No stone, no name. After Ruth's death, Abigail vanished. Some believed she wandered off into the woods and died. Others claimed Elijah locked her in the attic. No body was ever found. Her voice, however, was reportedly heard for years, a low, humming sound from the rafters when the wind blew just right. Isaac was now a boy of 8, and he had begun drawing pages and pages of what looked like family portraits, but all the faces were identical, same long hair, same pale eyes, same closed mouths. He never labeled them, never signed them, just left them in stacks, in the hallway. But the disturbing part, some of the faces were older than they should have been, like he was drawing ancestors from memory. Elijah, now alone with his son, stopped speaking entirely. He carved a phrase into the front door over and over until the wood split. "The names are lies. Only blood tells the truth." The Kinter home sat untouched for decades after that. No electricity, no running water, just a house sinking slowly into the earth like it was trying to erase itself. Rumors swirled in town about screams, about lights in the windows, about the boy who never aged. Some said Isaac was still alive in the 1980s, even though he should have been grown. But no one went to check. No one dared. It wasn't until 1991 that anyone stepped foot inside again. A government surveyor, mapping for a new road, was the first to file an official report. He described the house as frozen in time, with furniture still in place, rotting food on the table, and hundreds of hand-drawn portraits stacked like insulation along the walls. The place smelled like cedar and something deeper, something that made him forget his own name for a moment. He found no bodies, but there were signs of life. Fresh ash in the fireplace, warm blankets, a set of shoes by the bed that were far too small to belong to an adult. In the attic, he found carvings, hundreds of names etched into the beams: Ruth, Abigail, Elijah, Isaac, over and over, layered so thick it was impossible to tell where one name ended and another began. And beneath all of them, one final line, written in dark ink across the wooden floor: I am the son of my sister. I am the father of my blood. I am all that came before. I am all that remains. The house was sealed off shortly after. Authorities claimed it was a health hazard. But the real reason: the journals, the portraits, the genetic patterns they uncovered when they traced the names in census data, a family so tightly wound around itself it formed a kind of human Ouroboros. No outsiders for over 4 generations. Marriages between siblings, cousins, even parent and child, a lineage that never branched, only circled. To this day, the land remains off limits. Locals claim he's ours. C never died. That he's still in those woods watching, waiting. That the bloodline didn't end, it simply went underground. And if you ask the right person, if they trust you enough, they'll show you a photograph kept in the back of a forgotten drawer. A boy, maybe 12, staring straight at the camera, pale, hollow-eyed, smiling just a little. And in the corner of the image, almost out of frame, a hand rests on his shoulder. Long, familiar fingers. The same hand that was buried decades ago,